Welcome to the Human AI Alliance. I'm your host, Lee Bristow. We invite guests onto the show who can provide detailed, high-resolution answers to questions about the Human AI Alliance. This episode tackles one of the biggest questions in AI. Do we need different skills or approaches to develop AI solutions that provide an ROI? Today, we welcome Adriana, CEO of Pulsate and founder of Vect AI. Adriana spent 13 years at Google building and scaling its core ad tech products, so she's no stranger to building AI that works. Thank you for joining the Human AI Alliance show. Welcome, Adriana. How are you doing?
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to get started.
Amazing. So, like anything, you've got to start with the beginning. So, how did you find your way into the world of AI and product development?
Yeah, it's a great question, as it usually brings me to talk about not only my story, but perhaps the evolution of learning that I very much loved in my career. I started at Google in 2011. I came to Ireland from Romania. I moved here with Google, and I always had jobs that revolved around product management and managing product roadmaps. So somewhere at the intersection of product leadership and program management. And I worked with large engineering teams my whole life. So something that I really enjoyed learning throughout my time at Google was how to keep creatively solve for solutions that seem technically impossible, and how to organize those bigger problems into smaller problems that could be tackled with the right amount of data. And I think over time, I evolved into a product leader. I led a team responsible for products around sell site advertising. So basically, publisher solutions, everything to do with AdSense and Ad Manager, AdMob for developers. And I've learned a great deal of how important the collection and ingestion of data is to products that are consumer based, and then how an critical amalgamation of that data becomes a commercial selling point for enterprise level products. And I think this is what we're seeing today, and it's becoming clearer and clearer that companies that have been smart over the decades around their data are now able to use that as a currency in the age of AI. Later on, I suppose 13 years later, I stepped outside of the corporate enterprise product world, moved into a senior leadership role in the startup ecosystem, and learned a great deal about fintechs. Again, a massive question in this ecosystem around data ingestion, dispersed data sources. I learned a lot about how financial data sits and how it behaves as opposed or differently than advertising data, for example. And I then decided to open my own AI consulting company, pretty much designed for AI transformation and readiness for a middle market, a mid-ground market where it's really hard and expensive to get knowledge that would allow for your company to be transformed in the age of AI with the bigger consultancy firms. And I suppose with that, I filled the gap around data education, data audits, how data should sit for good AI implementation, and I suppose what frameworks are there to be brought in place when it comes to data that is actually becoming the number one product management concern or deliverable in any sort of like tech company, at least. I had a great, I suppose, 9 months of actively growing this business when I was recruited into this newer role that I have now. I'm very excited to have my first C-level role as a COO, so Chief Operations Officer with Pulsate. Still very much, in the fintech world, but Pulsate, and the reason why I think this is such a great continuation, a little bit serendipity maybe of everything that I've learned so far is that Pulsate brings the two worlds together, or maybe the three worlds together, where it is entirely dedicated at the financial, retail, banking ecosystem in the US, but it brings forward product attributes that I've learned at Google, particularly around push communications and targeting the right audience, budgeting for the right type of campaign. Whereas also wanting to become a data first, AI first enabled tech stack. So with that in mind, I suppose throughout my career, some of the bigger learnings were that it's really important to gather in your builder career, if you are someone who's building product or helping to build product, helping other teams build product, whether you are a project manager or program manager, a technical release manager for a development team, an engineer, an AI powered engineer, a QA tester, product manager, all of this like roles that are spinning in a product enabled organization. What's really important to understand, especially in I suppose in today's marketplace for skill, in terms of building good AI products, is that your skills that you're acquiring need to be highly transferable, to the point where AI is enabling a more permeative fabric for those skills to be transferable from one job to the other, where PMs now can easily run UX mocks or deliver MVP prototype, which before was never the case, right? Like it would have been great if PMs could have done that, and I think some companies were lucky to have PMs who are very visual. But you would almost always resort to an UI UX person who would help you run a mocks and put your visual requirements, put visual requirements into place. But I would even go even further, where AI seems to be this transparency wall that helps people permeate their skills into the development life stages and help someone who previously has been quite non-technical, like myself. I would say that maybe my standard of technical is very advanced, but in general, I have been in teams where I was considered to be non-technical. Whereas now I can understand so much more of what a data layer means and what does it mean when we say, a data layer is intertwined with the code, and we have to, roll out that yarn to be able to have AI step at any stage in the development pipeline. Truly, to respond to the theme of today's podcast, it feels to me that we have more potential than ever to be multiple people on the team and to manage our skills with so much more creativity and efficiency, because it's no longer difficult, or it's no longer as difficult to understand and to gain empathy around what other teams used to do before. I also think that over time, I think one of the biggest skills that I have gained working with engineering and product teams was to really understand when something is difficult to build. Whereas I would assume not a lot of people in leadership today understand. And it's really important for leaders in a product or engineering oriented organization to gain the knowledge and the instinct around difficulty for technical achievement, especially now with AI, because we're seeing all the time, that roadmaps are definitely demanding some AI checkboxes to be ticked. And it seems like there's all these mandates that we need to bring AI here. We need to become an AI powered company. We need to become an AI agent company. We need to start managing agents in our team. We need to start coding alongside AI, stuff like that, which is a great mandate that you could see other companies are doing on LinkedIn. But I think most leaders in this space, especially those who have become leaders without technical acumen over time, need to develop an instinct for understanding the difficulty of their mandates. from a technical and delivery perspective. So anyway, a huge segue here into my background, but I suppose
No, that was fantastic. I loved it. You just kept going, and so I wasn't going to get in the way of
yeah,
that.
no,
So yeah, keep it on. So there were a couple things that you mentioned that kind of sort of flagged in my head. One of them was just in terms of not having kind of the technical skill and the technical acumen. And it is a bit of a challenge because currently there's a stat that is pretty much thrown around all four corners of the internet, which is 95% of AI projects fail. So, when you talk about building products that don't flop, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that many technology products failed before AI came along. This is not new to AI. It's perhaps new to everybody outside of the technology kind of stack. But there is, the rubbish heap is full of products that were really great ideas that just were ahead of their time or behind the time, or just didn't have enough infrastructure around them to actually deliver and get to clients, right? There's a number of very big tech companies that were way ahead of the market of where it needed to be. So I think that's just one of the elements that we need to kind of educate leadership about.
yes.
But coming back to the product and the regulation piece that you touched on while you were chatting, so the EU AI Act is a product safety regulation, and I think a lot of businesses across the board, and that includes technologists, don't appreciate that the EU AI Act is not a horizontal regulation in terms of the business. It is a horizontal regulation in terms of its deployment. But in terms of a business, it's literally looking at product and where you've deployed AI into that product. So, with that mindset, do you see the EU AI Act as a hindrance? Do you see it as an issue relating to innovation? What is your stance on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question and quite a complex one. It's hard to say, it's hard to judge. And I would say many companies in general, especially those of American tech capital, would come in and say, okay, the European Union is full of regulations, and is it even viable to distribute our products here? And I've been in a company where more than half of a team across engineering was dedicated to saving revenue from regulations or protecting, from unconsented queries and figuring out how to adapt to regulations. And these are multi-year projects and affect the product experience in a way where all of the thinking is no longer going into this, okay, how can we create fantastic magic moments into the product for our users, but it's now part of it is now thinking, how can we make sure our users have a compliant experience, which in many ways for deep thinkers like the big tech companies, engineering teams, can be perceived a little boring and laborious. So from that perspective, it is probably a hindrance. But I will say that one great thing that the EU AI Act is doing is bringing some credibility to products that want to deploy AI in an ethical and responsible way. It is speaking very clearly around the level of risk that AI deployments have in products today, and particularly around the level of risk around certain data sets, where you have classifiers for things like, minimal risk, limited risk, high risk, completely unacceptable risk. And I think this hasn't particularly been top of mind for companies over the decades. In many ways, we've been told at the very beginnings of the internet that the more data you sit on, the better. At some point, that data is going to make you very rich or very stable in the marketplace. And I think we're coming into a place where data protocols haven't been maturing as fast as the coolness effect of the technology. And there wasn't necessarily, especially in most, SMB type companies for tech or fintechs, there hasn't been data teams dedicated to understanding or differentiating between how cool is our technology versus, hey, is our data safe, compliant, rigorous, unbiased, deployed responsibly, collected in a way that it doesn't affect the integrity or doesn't invite back bad actors. So I think that hasn't necessarily been top of mind when it came to building the products, to the point where over time we have developed very robust frameworks for product development or product management, like the MVP, okay, the minimal viable product, to get us to deliver a certain value to the user. But we haven't really spoken about what is the MVD, the minimally viable data that is needed to be parsed through our MVP at a very, very minimal level. Can we create data minimization? And in this way, could we reduce the scope of our risk, or could we reduce our risk in terms of being compliant with such a complex regulation like the EU Act? And I think that, yes, while at the glance, it is yet another regulation, it is putting a lot of pressure on teams to become compliant. It is given a lot of heartache, and it is stopping the creative juices around what could we do with AI. But it is a forcing mechanism to stop data hoarding at a very perpetual level over the years, where we're creating all of this voracious data hungry systems, and we're now in a position where we're putting AI on top of this data, and it's learning that it needs more and more and more data because we haven't created data minimization protocols. And it could be more data of the same bias. It could, like we're seeing now, the reality of CVs created with AI and the reality of systems reading those CVs created with the same AIs. The biases of those two are surfacing certain CVs that maybe are not the right ones for the job, but because the same AI models are being used both in the CV writing and the CV reading, that data, that bias is going to consistently expand itself in a never-ending loop. And I think that is why we need regulations like the EU Act, where it's forcing some rigor into the data and into the way we collect, ingest, onboard, harmonize, process, facilitate, and then reproduce that data into the market, so that we don't just sit on massive amounts of data that are possibly don't even have an expiration date. I mean, I've been in companies where there were data stacks older than 10 years and nobody ever needed that amount of backtrack data. Nothing was ever being used. And it's not just the EU AI Act that is forcing that. I think at a leadership level, we have to stay ahead of that curve and really read the act. I would encourage any leader of product or operations around product who is in charge of teams working on products that are AI enabled or somewhat handling AI to some protocols, whether it is for compliance or otherwise for producing features, to read the EU AI Act. It took me about 3 days because it was really hard to go through its language that I am not used to. It is not the job of a lawyer anymore, or just the job of a lawyer anymore. It is the job of the leader in every company to understand the character of this act and what it forces you to think ahead of. And if you want to stay ahead of the curve, you need to think about compliance of your products as compliance of your data. You need to think about the features that are created for explainability versus data ingestion, because there's not that many differentiations between features in a product. You either have features that are created to explain a certain action, so that's explainability, or features that are created to ingest or generate the ability to ingest data. And those are features that need to be classified and triaged by risk level. And then I would say If you have a bigger multinational product that you want to expand across languages, that is also really, really important to understand in relation to the EU Act. A product that steps out of the English language and you want to localize it in other European markets might bring forward language specifics and cultural specifics in terms of the use cases in those particular regions. And it is really interesting to see how the EU AI Act wants us to treat those use cases outside of the AI main language, which is the English language. I wanted to say something else, and before it escapes me.
Keep going. Yeah.
From 2000, from the year 2000 into 2010, a big theme of thought for design was accessibility. And how can we make our products by design more accessible, where there wasn't that much cost cut from research around what people with certain who were less able, or had a disability or had the need for a particular experience in the front end. So by design, there were more budgets allocated across accessible design, and this is how large design models have created by default libraries for accessible design components like Google Material Design. I think doing that iteration over the years has, of course, created the default expectation that if you're going to use a design system, of course, you are going to be presented with accessibility features or accessibility components in a design library. I think the same type of process has to happen now for regulation and compliance, where compliance becomes something that is innate to a design library, where you need to design with compliance in mind. If you're going to be presented with the design system and work with a design system that's offered by some of those, bigger companies, compliance needs to be something that exists in that design. And it's not just the front end, it's the entire experience of the product, where I would say observability, ability to log in and see what your system is doing with the data, ability to connect and audit interdependability of your systems, multi-parts. All of these things have to be part of a compliance by design type of culture that leaders have to start talking about and invest in. It's so often that I have seen with Vect AI, leaders who were incredibly generous with their teams. We have unlimited budget for AI. Our teams can now have access to Gemini and ChatGPT and all of the latest models and Claude Code and, Lovable and all of those things. But realistically, the discussion starts there. Where do you want to invest? It's not just the literacy that needs to be achieved through opening the door to all of these licenses and very expensive tools when you add them all together, times the number of your employees. You're probably tackling to some percentage the ability of your team to learn about how to prompt, how to use, how to include these tools in their day-to-day work, but you still haven't figured out, or you still haven't understood how AI can help you drive compliance by design, drive an MVD type of data minimization framework, really assess your system, really be able to audit it, really equip your QA testing team. Before you fire all of them, they can actually still
before you fire all of them.
Yeah.
that opens up a whole ethical,
a whole new level. Because what we're seeing very, very, very often is that, OPEX for AI licenses is understood at a very, very superficial level. And then at some point you hit the bottom of your wallet and you're like, oh my God, where could we or could we facilitate money to continue to build with AI, but you haven't set yourself clear goals. You haven't run any diagnosis of your organizational structure to the point of what design systems are we using, what skills do we have in our engineering team, and so on. And so, of course, AI will probably be thought to fail.
Yeah. So, I mean, you running down a gap analysis framework in terms of your data, the team, the people, the leadership, all of that kind of stuff, right? That's fundamentally what you're doing, and that's a really good place to start. But I want to take the next question, because I think this is it's a really important one, which is, what separates a profitable AI tool from something that's cool but useless? So assuming all the gap analysis are now done and you got the product team, you got the data, you got the minimization down, what is that? What is the delta between a cool but useless thing and an AI tool that actually returns an ROI?
Yeah, that again is a very good question. I think I would link it back to having a clear goal in mind for your utilization. To what end are you using this particular AI tool or AI, I suppose, model, if you're using a small model or you're training one? I think what separates a failed implementation or something that looks great on paper and gives some results, and during experimentation and actually does some flip
bombs.
Yeah, or it could be even in testing, because you're exposing it to a very safe and clean data set, and typically before you open it up and ramp the percentage of the data that you're going to feed it, it could be like, oh my God, this is great, and I've actually lived through that example, and I was absolutely convinced, this is the right path here. As opposed to other types of releases in product, where it's a pretty clear and well-learned path to release something. You either release it in a very A/B type experiment with results that you can take and expand your release percentage by percentage into a user base and so on. With AI, because it can be pretty undeterministic and unpredictable, and there's a huge amount of fabricated behavior because it hallucinates on itself, I think it's okay culturally in product teams to accept that whatever looks good on paper and in the plan could end up to fail or not deliver the results it has promised. And it should be okay to also allocate the time to roll it back and retrain it, or assess the data it was trained on, or assess the kind of code it was given to code alongside, or the prompting around it, and all of that, right? I think what separates a good implementation from a good outcome from a bad one is if your goal is not ethereal. Is that a word? I think a lot of the times our goals in organizations with AI are very, it's like a weird,
convoluted and esoterical, and like literally all the words that you would not use in a technical environment.
It's like, what is this? What does it mean? Even for someone who's been in the industry, close to 17, 18 years now, what do we mean we want to achieve X, Y, Z? And people tend to overcome that by adding more numbers and making it more specifically, making it more specific by adding more numbers, but it's not explaining itself. So I think it's really important to know how you define your end goals, and to be knowing that, I think you need to be a really good artist at knowing what questions you should ask yourself, or choosing the question that matters most. Without
I got a really simple version of this. Like it's super simple, but it kind of gets the point across. Basically, an AI solution should not add a step; it should remove 3.
Yeah, or if it's adding a step, have you missed something? Is it,
Exactly.
can
It's
you
sort of like
try?
that's a time ROI. So it's not a revenue ROI. It's not you selling a product or whatever the case may be, but it's sort of like the value of this thing. Does it add something? Like, does it add an extra step that I've now got to copy out and then do something and then manipulate, or is it part of my actual process? So if I'm designing a new pitch deck, does it support the way that I'm working in Canva? So how is that working? Or do I need to now move that and take it into another product, or download it and put it into PowerPoint, and then I've got to re-edit it in PowerPoint, and then I've got to take it back up to Canva? That entire process needs to be smoothed out. So if you can't work in one platform, let's assume Canva for a moment, and you can't work in PowerPoint, it's sort of like getting those two to come together. And I know, Microsoft is working on their own version of that, Gemini is working on their own version of that, Canva
Yeah,
is working on their own version of that, but right now none of them have quite landed that. So that's a kind of a user tool. But the next version that I see in terms of like enterprise, especially when you're talking about minimum viable data, minimum viable products, is, can it be integrated into existing business processes? Because if
correct.
it can't fit in with reactive AI, you can't integrate limited AI with reactive AI. You don't have a working system. You basically got a parallel system, and that means that a human has now got to do two systems or operate two systems as opposed to one system.
Yeah, that's very astute. I think in net, personally, I find myself wondering, how did I used to perform before AI was part of my day to day? Because I just think it's great, right? Like, I think it's a great tool. It helps me deepen my understanding of certain challenges we have in the organization, or otherwise, it just would help me do more research on certain topics, or even something as simple as, it would help me run my week better and create more transparency in my calendar and tell me how to do that, right? But I don't know. So far, I haven't been as restrictive as to say, before we were all swept in by this wave, was I spending more or less time on these tasks? Was I happier with maybe understanding more but executing less, or maybe executing more but understanding less of what I was doing? And how has that shifted in time gains for me? In general, the pattern that I see personally, and this might not be across the board, is that I'm definitely achieving more at a delivery level, where I feel like more things are being done on a weekly basis. But I don't know that in general it is as profound of an understanding in my mind, and or that I feel like a deep awareness of everything that I have delivered in a week as I used to do before. So maybe that's, the normalcy of delivering more in an assisted way. So maybe if you can imagine someone on your team is helping you so much more deliver these things, and you're no longer thinking about them. But I
Just
think,
the,
I think
the e
ROI wise and time, I don't know yet if it's net gains.
So the way that I like to think about it is the CEO who's had a PA for the last 20 years, let's say, of his career. He can't remember any of the kind of the core details of things that are happening. It just kind of happens. There's this magical place where fairies live, and he just throws it over there, and it just magically gets done. It's a bit like that.
It's just like that. And the question is
But
that
it
okay?
does allow, yeah, it again, it depends, because it's you're not in the minutia of getting the actual task done necessarily, but you add a different layer in terms of your thinking. So you're thinking a little bit further out in terms of your strategy. So like um, Warren Buffett often is kind of quoted or cited as somebody who has very little actions in his calendar. And the reason why is he's there to think. There's an entire company that needs to be run. There's a whole bunch of things that get done. So there needs to be a CEO that's in the minutia, that's doing the things that need to get done on the daily, so that he can think about the contemplation of contemplation around what he's going to be doing. So that's the freedom. So if you find that you are able to think a little bit further because you're not in the minutia of doing X, Y, and Z, then it is being useful. If you're doing X, Y, and Z, or you're not doing the minutia work just so that you can then scroll on Instagram for 6 hours, then no.
Oh, darn it.
Yeah, so if that's what you were planning to do for the rest of the afternoon,
Okay,
Adriana,
got
then
me.
no, it's not going to happen. It's dead. It's dead.
That's
So
regrettable.
we are getting close to overtime. I've just got one question, but I want you to do like a quick fire on this one. So, you've spoken a lot about data. So I want to kind of give this one last question, but just like quick fire thinking. So,
Okay.
like, what is the number one human bias that typically sinks into the data or AI projects that tends to lead projects down a failure route?
Overcomplication of decision making.
Okay, I like that. So yeah, very, very nice. So, and I think that's a fantastic answer. So I think let's end it there. So yeah, thank you to our audience for joining and for watching it live, and then also for joining and listening to it afterwards. If you found this conversation interesting and valuable, please share it with someone that you feel will benefit from its message. If you would like to reach out to me, please do so on my LinkedIn page. I welcome any conversation, and if you'd like to schedule an appointment to discuss some of our services like ISO 42001 gap analysis, please feel free to reach out. And in closing, Adriana, how can the audience contact you if they would like to discuss this topic or any other topic in future?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I am pretty present on LinkedIn. Please do reach out on LinkedIn or otherwise through Lee. If you have a more pointed question in your business that I may be able to assist with, that's also possible through my Vect AI LinkedIn page. And other than that, I just want to say thank you again, Lee. This was an incredible conversation. I think we need to talk more and more and more about data and ethics and responsibility around data. And, we talked a lot about thought leadership in the past, and I think data leadership is the next big thing, or it's already happening.
It's already happening. And on that note, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.